ahead and get started here. I'm Paul Freedman, the founder of the Entangled group and your humble moderator for this event. I'm biased because I'm the moderator of this panel, but I think this is by far the most important panel at this conference, if not the most important panel in human history. Because what we're talking about is turning around universities, and given the number of universities that on an annual basis continue to face financial distress, the art of being able to turn around those universities becomes increasingly important. And I'm honored to have a set of esteemed panelists who've all been part of turning around universities, and their stories are incredibly impressive from what they've been able to achieve. I was told not to have the panelists introduce themselves because I was told that everybody in the audience would have read the full pack and know all their bios. And if we're at a learning conference, the one thing we should know is that people don't do their homework. So I'm not saying that that's true. So what I would like to do, and we won't do going down the road, we'll have an interactive session here, but I would like to start, and we'll start with Eric and come this way, with who you are, quickly, and then we know that you turned around an institution, and we'll get to that story, but let's first start with why your institution got to the point where it needed to turn around.
Eric Darr, Harrisburg University in the capital of Pennsylvania, and we were a startup university, so we first had students in 2005, and it was kind of a crazy idea to start an independent, nonprofit, comprehensive university in today's world, particularly in the state of Pennsylvania, with hundreds and hundreds of other universities. So we weren't actually a turnaround, we were a startup. So you'll hear more about that story.
My name is Michael Sorrell. I'm the president at Paul Quinn College. Our institution got to the difficult times basically because, for lack of a better term, the way it was designed. We are a historically black college. We were founded to educate freed slaves and their progeny. When that is your mission, people aren't paying full tuition when they started coming, right? Because they had no money. It was founded by a religious denomination that felt that it was important that they maintain control. So they did not accept outside donations. And the institution, they were very proud of that, which made a lot of sense. But as time went on, the ambition for the institution was to educate people who were coming from very difficult backgrounds and just give them a better path at life. And that better path at life often didn't mean that they were investment bankers or corporate lawyers or management consultants. They were teachers, they were municipal workers, they were ministers, people who did amazing work, and are some of the best people that I know, but they are not people that made a tremendous amount of money, and making decisions with limited resources will do that to you.
My name is Nivine Megahed, and I'm president of National Louis University, a university that was founded in 1886. I took over in 2010, and at my first board meeting, I was told by the board chair that the university had been self-liquidating for decades. I think the way that it got there was probably a series of accidents, some benign neglect, and a couple of presidents that didn't stay on a very ethical path with the institution. And so, and then we hit the Great Recession in 2010, and what became self-liquidating became a pretty serious crisis that needed to be addressed immediately, or else we were not going to survive.
My name is Peter Cohen. I operate the University of Phoenix in Phoenix, Arizona. We started 40 plus years ago to serve working adults. Over the next, between 1976 and 2010, we grew to be 475,000 students, of whom most were online. From 2010 to 2017, we went from 475,000 students down to under 100,000 students. So what caused that is a change in the funding environment, change in the policy environment, probably an overreach in terms of mission, moving from serving working adults to getting into the community college business and trying to serve 18 to 22-year-olds, which became a 200,000 student business with not very great outcomes.
Sounds tough. And incredibly talented panel. We've done a lot of things inside and outside of education. why would you possibly do this job? I'll start with you, Peter. Why?
I was going to retire, and I realized that there was more work to be done. When I got the opportunity to take over a university that had such a history, both a positive history in terms of how many adults it had served, and a negative history in terms of the brand damage and the reputational damage that had taken place over the prior 10 years. For me, it was kind of a grand challenge. From a personal standpoint, I love grand challenges. From an emotional standpoint, I think that working adults in America who don't have their college degree typically are behind the rest of the economy. Most of the time, it's not their fault. They were not well served by the K-12 system, and they ended up being in the wrong zip code when they were born. And those people deserve the same opportunity to get a college degree as everybody else in America. So for me, it was a calling and a great calling for this point in my career.
And Michael, the story I heard is that you were thinking about doing this or buying a basketball team. Buying the basketball team seems a lot cooler. Why?
No, so what happened was that I literally was driving down the highway to go scout Kevin Durant, for those of you who are basketball fans, and I got a phone call from the chair of the board who asked me if I'd want to be president. And I sort of laughed and said, no, I'm part of a group that's buying an NBA franchise. We had reached an agreement to purchase the Memphis Grizzlies. I was going to be part owner and president of the franchise. And I politely told the bishop at the time, I said, listen, I have no idea what you're going to pay me, but they're going to pay me more. And, he hit me with the famous last words, well, you should pray about it, right? So, I called my sister, and my sister is a teacher in Chicago Public Schools. She's an extraordinary educator, is really, really gifted. And I said, hey, sis, guess what? I just got asked to be president of a college. And my sister, who's 18 months younger, just says, of course you did, right? She's like, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. She's like, you're buying a basketball team, even though I still don't know how you have money to buy a basketball team. She's like, and a school asks you to be president, and you've never even taken an education class before. She said, do you know who you are? I said, I'm me. And she says, no, you're the Black Forrest Gump, right? She's like, stuff just happens to you, right? So, and that's an honest, true story, right? And so, for me, I took the job. First of all, I took it on an interim basis. I was only going to do it for 90 days. Turns out I'm the world's worst interim college president. And see, they even agree, right? And, but a couple things got to me. Number one, I grew up in a family where everyone else in my family went to a historically black college but myself. I am who I am because those institutions got it right for my family. My father didn't go to college. He was an amazing entrepreneur, built an incredibly successful restaurant business. But my mother, my grandmother, my aunts, cousins, my sister, everyone else went. So me doing this job is a way of saying thank you for the blessings that my life has had due to those institutions. Secondly, when I moved to Dallas, the people who befriended me were a group of individuals who were alums of Paul Quinn College. And they were some of the best people I've ever met. And it pained me that people thought their school was such a horrible school. And these were wonderful people. So this is my way of saying thank you for making a stranger in a strange land feel welcome. And then the third piece of it is I thought I could make a difference, right? I thought people deserved more than what they were getting, and it is a great honor to be in charge of the institution that does that for folks.
Well, as a Warriors fan, thank you for not scouting Durant. I think some of you probably saw the Chronicle piece about Harrisburg University and 7,000 students, thriving institution. We'll get to how that happened, but it wasn't always that way, Eric. What was your darkest day?
No, so we were founded, as I said, in 2005, but the work had started, in 2001, 2002, with a call from the Chamber of Commerce and businesses in the central Pennsylvania region who looked at what would be good for that region in the next 100 years. And they looked at things like tax structure and land use and transportation, and education was one. And at the time, Harrisburg was the largest capital in the Union that didn't have its own four-year college. And we all know the positive benefits that accrue to an urban setting when an institution of higher education has been there for a very long time. And for Harrisburg to not have it, that was one of the problems. So Harrisburg was a bankrupt city that had seen its population decline over a series of decades, moving from an industrial town to a town without much of a future, frankly. We were founded with this idea, much as Michael said, to provide access to those that otherwise wouldn't have access. And being in Pennsylvania, many, many, many fine liberal arts schools, no one focused on science and technology. And so we were focused on science and technology in downtown Harrisburg with the mission of serving those that otherwise wouldn't have access to science and technology education. Sounds great, but what it means is you have a whole bunch of students at the undergraduate level that have a whole boatload of needs and no money to pay for it. Not a really great business model, and as I tell people, right, tax exempt is a IRS status, not a business objective. And so, you know, it was probably 2012, to answer your question, right, faced with debt on a building that we had built, thinking we needed a building of our own to attract students. We had lived in the very early days through leased spaces, and as the Chronicle article said, you know, had about 1/10 of the money needed to pay the debt service on the bond, you know, and bondholders are notoriously humorless folks, and we're not going to let us just kind of skate. So that was the really difficult day. Was you know, focusing on undergraduates without a lot of money led us to that particular point.
And total amount of debt you were worth?
Well, the annual debt payments at that point were $3.2 million, which doesn't sound like a lot of money, but when you have $300,000...
Oh, it sounds like a lot of money.
If we poured it on the table, it would look like a lot of money. But the total amount that the university owed at that point?
We owed $75 million.
Okay. Yeah. Also sounds like a lot of money.
That sounds like a lot.
And Nivine, you sort of told the story that after your first board meeting, after you got the job, the trustees tell you they're self-liquidating. Some people call that a bait and switch, but I don't know. I'm not going to complain. And then you know, knowing the backstory, shortly afterwards, due to some programmatic changes in Chicago public schools, you lost something like an additional $10 million of revenue.
Yeah.
So you're in the whole $10 million.
Yeah.
Let me flip this question around. As it relates to institutional change, are these forcing functions? Is this $60 million in debt? Is this 30 days of payroll? Is this change in control? Is that forcing function a good thing to inspire change?
You mean is a crisis, take advantage of a crisis?
Is a crisis a good thing?
In retrospect, it was a great thing. And even during it, we said, look, we're stuck with this, so let's take advantage of never waste a good crisis. It's one of Rahm Emanuel's favorite lines, and we did not waste it. If I'd had an opportunity to do it without a crisis, I think we could have still gotten it done. But the crisis did help us to really take a deep, hard look at who we were, where we needed to go, what we needed to look like, where was higher ed going, and make some of the kind of dramatic changes that needed to happen to reposition the institution for future growth and stability, and to what I call try to future-proof the institution. And so to that extent, the crisis gave us the power to make some of the more dramatic changes we needed to make.
And Michael, Nivine said something there that even if there wasn't a crisis, you could have still got it done. Do you believe that? Can you if you just have a mediocre university, no crisis, can you do the kind of transformation you've done at Paul Quinn College?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we were unencumbered by a history of success, right? So that was a gift, right? I mean, that was a gift, because what I have observed, one of the things that when you are someone that people think understands how to turn things around, people ask you, how do you turn things around? And one of the most fascinating things to me are the number of institutions that are sitting in the midst of a crisis that don't recognize that they are in the midst of a crisis.
Absolutely.
Right? That engage in self-delusional behavior because they can still make payroll or they can still find somewhere to get money. I mean, no, it was you guys that was selling. No, you all were selling. Yeah, like there's so much crisis here, I can't keep it straight, right? But the fact that you can sell property to meet your needs is a red flag. But far too many people aren't thinking about who will be there next. They're just trying to deal with their now. And I just think that there's a clarifying moment where, I mean, for me, we had 30 days of cash left. We had, Boston Consulting Group told us that if we didn't make radical change, 18 months to 24 months later, the school would close, right? The institution at that point was 135 years old. It had survived Reconstruction. It had survived Jim Crow. It had survived the Great Depression. I did not want to be the person to kill it, right? And so you have to make sure people understand the depths of the crisis. But I think if people can fool themselves into believing it's not as bad, they will fool themselves into believing it's not as bad, because to admit it is means you have to accept your role in the crisis.
Paul, I mean, I would also say that, you know, in our case, and I don't know about the others, but you know, it changed the mindset of trustees, right? Particularly, right? I had, you know, not, you know, we were not around nearly as long as the other institutions, but you know, we had founding trustees who are more problematic than alumni, right? So because they had founded an institution with a certain mindset and a certain objective in their heads, and that's they were going to drive off the cliff with that particular mindset in their heads and say, well, we tried, and go to cocktail parties and say we tried, and you know, this allowed the conversation to say, no, you founded something with a model that just was not sustainable. We need to do something completely different. And without this kind of crisis, that conversation would not have been successful.
And you talked about trustees, but you know, higher education institutions are built by design not to be dynamic. They're built by design to be resilient. In fact, if you look at the institutions that are over 500 years old, something like 80% of those institutions are universities.
Churches
and universities, almost entirely. You know, you have trustees you mentioned, you have students, you have faculty, you have all these constituencies. And now what you're trying to do is turn around a culture. You know, Peter, you did doing this at a very large institution. How do you transform that culture?
When I arrived there, we had, the year before I got there, they had to cut costs by $400 million. When you think about $400 million in costs, then you divide that by an average salary of somewhere around $100,000, and you've got a lot of employees who need to leave the organization. And so when you think about this, from 2010 to 2017, every year they'd been cutting. And they finally thought, because leadership at that time was always trying to tell and put a positive spin on everything. So people didn't really talk about the fact that we were reducing faculty and reducing staff, and we went from 32,000 faculty down to 6,000. We went from 16,000 staff members down to 3,700, but nobody was talking about it. And so people were always kind of looking over their shoulder trying to figure out who was next, but there was no honesty about what was really happening at the university. And so one of the things that I did is looked at the numbers, looked at the data, and realized that if we didn't make some radical changes, you know, we were going to have to do something like you guys are talking about, which is shut down a university that in a private equity world, you know, if you're shutting down the asset they just bought, you're pretty much losing your job.
That's worse than having to tell people you messed up at dinner parties.
And so one of the things I looked at, I had two issues I had to face. One was I had a culture where nobody knew the truth because the truth had been well hidden. And two, on top of the $400 million, I had to cut another $275 million. Otherwise, we were going to run out of cash. And so from a cultural standpoint, the first thing was to be transparent. And so one of the things I did my very first couple of months on the job was to hold a town hall with the 5,000 employees that we had and talk about where we stood, show them the metrics on our students, what our student success was, what our enrollments were, what our revenues were, what our costs were, and what was left at the bottom. and that if we didn't make changes, there would be nothing left at the bottom, which means all these people who had been here and gone through literally more than 10 years of declining enrollment every year, they would be having to look somewhere else. And it was kind of one of my hardest days, was having to face that with our staff and talk about that. So in having that conversation with people, you know, it was the first time they'd heard that. And they had thought things were fine. So, you know, it was a big slap in the face to everybody to recognize your new president's telling you you could go out of business after you'd been there for almost 40 years. And so going through that, we were able to start changing the culture where people expected the truth. We had direct communication from the top of the organization down to the bottom of the organization. When I got there, we had security doors, for example. You couldn't get to the floor that the executives were on. I'm not sure who they were afraid of, whether it was the students or whether it was their staff, but you weren't allowed to get up to that floor. And so, you know, you had to have a security guard let you in. So I got rid of all the security guards, got rid of the buzzers, got rid of the elevator passes that got you up there, took away all the mahogany offices, opened up everybody into glass-walled rooms where everybody could see what was going on, and bought a massive Starbucks machine and put it on the 10th floor where we were and said, everybody come up, there's free Starbucks coffee up here. And that was actually part of changing the culture, was getting people to understand it was okay to go talk to the senior leaders face to face. And those kind of simple, small things actually had a great impact on people's ability to feel open and feel that we were transparent and that we understood their issues.
And Nivine, very, very different culture, but that you at National Louis, but you also had to turn it around.
Yeah, the cultural issues there were a lot of indecision around anything. In fact, it was all based on a culture of like, just don't do anything, which is not unusual in higher ed because they are built for resilience. So people just figure if they kick the can down the road, nothing will happen. And we knew that if we did not also make radical change, we were not going to survive. And one of the moves that we made was we started, once we came out of making we did all the transparency around what was going on at the institution, what the numbers were. We communicated with everyone, but in a traditional institution, when people don't know you and you're telling them that, they don't believe you. So they're like, no, you're hiding it. There's more money around. Just use up this money or use up that money. So we had to work really, really hard to explain what was happening. Once we came out of it, one of the things that I implemented like 8 years ago is that since that date, every single orientation we've ever done, and we started doing it for all the current staff and faculty, but for every staff and faculty that was hired after that, I would attend the orientation sessions and use that as the first opportunity to introduce them to what our institution was about, what our mission was about, what we were trying to accomplish, what our values were about. And the biggest thing I would talk about is creating a culture where we were not only student-centered, but that everybody was a decision maker in that culture and had to make decisions on behalf of students. We developed this card that was called the President's Get Out of Jail Free card. And it became like it's now an institutional tradition that everybody has their get out of jail free card, which was given out because it was like, you need to make decisions, and if you make the wrong decision, it doesn't matter. You're gonna learn from it, but if your boss comes to you and say, why did you do that? You give them the President's Get Out of Jail card, because you need to make sure you are always thinking on behalf of our students, and we can always fix it if it's wrong, but we can't fix not deciding and not doing things on behalf of our students. It has made the world of difference in a culture where I think people do feel empowered also to make mistakes and to recover from those mistakes. And it's been a journey you watch as we've recovered and brought on more and more people, that it is a different place today than it was back then.
And did everybody come along with you? Did all the faculty, all the staff come along with that journey?
The ones who left behind a lot, I'd say the majority did. There was a little more turnover after the fact. There was mostly a lot of fear. And when we did our first big layoff, we had to do a deep layoff that first year in 2011. I think we reduced our institution by a third. A third of our people were let go. And we were all over the newspapers. The AAUP was down our throat. It was not a happy time for any of us. So after they recovered from that and dealt with their survivor's guilt, I think the majority of people stayed with us. But a lot, we've grown again since then and have been able to help to.
But you
adjust that
mentioned
culture.
in these stories, you're mentioning a few things, large and small, but a lot of things that run against the current of of what higher education typically operates: tolerance for change, pure transparency. I mean, I want to go deeper into this staff one because I think one of the things that's also difficult in higher education is to fire people, to let people go. Michael, did everybody come along with your transformation?
No, they did not. We, from the time I started, I think we've replaced 95% of the people.
Wow.
Right. And listen, here's the thing. The culture of losing seeps into people's souls. And the fear of, and I want to be clear, I didn't start out, I'd never fired anyone prior to the time I arrived at Paul Quinn, right? I mean, I had managed my own teams, I had run my own business. I came from the mentality that I could always, just inspire you to be your best version of yourself. And what I encountered at Paul Quinn, one, was that I was younger than everyone else, right? And so there was a certain segment of people who were just sort of like, you're just younger and I don't have to listen to you. Then there were those individuals that were actively working against us, right? And we didn't have time for that. I mean, if you have 30 days of cash, there's not a lot of warm and fuzzy moments, right? I mean, and so it was the first person that I let go was the chief of staff. And the chief of staff came into my office the first week I was there, angry because we terminated the football team. And he was angry because he had worked in one of the school districts, and the stadium that the football team played in was named after him. And he wasn't a bad guy, but he had self-interest. And our institutional ethos, the ethos that I brought to the school, was we over me. The needs of a community supersede the wants of an individual. You don't get to be selfish. Choose the harder right over the easier wrong without apparent regard to self-interest. Like, we live by these things. And he comes in and he says, I'm submitting my letter of resignation for the end of June. And I was like, well, this is the last week of March. So what are you going to be doing until June? And he was just like, well, And I said, well, I think I'll give you 2 weeks. And he said, well, wait a minute. I was like, we have a lot of work to do, and everyone's got to be pulling in the right directions. And if you're quitting in June, you're not going to work hard enough, right? And then there were other individuals, and there weren't a lot of people. I mean, I'm trying to say this the most sensitive way possible. I think that sometimes people have to make a decision who they want to be and what they want to be a part of. And change is difficult for many people, right? It is scary. It requires you to embrace your own fragility, and you have to do it with humility, right? And it also means you have to embrace the possibility that you've been wrong. And that's okay, right? Like, all of us are going to make mistakes. All of us are going to do something wrong. The biggest mistake you can make is to fall in love with your own narrative, right? Like, our students deserve more than that. The institution deserves more than that. What's interesting, the people who stayed, the librarian and her husband, the nurse, the woman who runs Upward Bound, and a core group of my faculty. And they are the happiest people you can imagine. They love our students. There were many nights that they would come to my office and they would just say, you are doing the right thing. We believe in you. And this person, they had to go. They should have been gone a long time ago. And you'll find people who will work with you, but don't fall in love with the idea that you can save everyone, because you can't.
And what you're just talking to, Michael, this idea of finding partners in the change. As I've talked to university presidents who've done transformations, they've always spoken to it either as a collective group or at least one person on the inside. Often it's somebody to keep the faculty off their backs. Apologies to any faculty in the room.
But your board too, right? Like, I mean, I think that's the thing that people don't always fully understand. You can't do these types of changes without having your board with you lockstep. I mean, we lost 80% of our students in the first 2 years. And our board were very confident and said, stay the course, we are with you. They have backed us each step of the way, and I will always appreciate that.
And Nivine, you had the board, getting the board on your side as part of your story as well.
Yeah, the board was instrumental, and I didn't have to get them on my side. I had a very savvy board that understood that really tough decisions needed to be made, and they were standing there backing us up all the way. We had people rioting at the time, and they stood firm. I remember vividly a board meeting where they're coming through and faculty are standing there picketing that this was just a horrible thing that has happened to them. You're talking about, you had a lot of people leave. We had a tenure system. I was wishing more of them would leave, but they wouldn't. I mean, they just wanted to stay there and be miserable and say we were lying to them. And the board stood firm with us the entire time. And honestly, what you talk about we over me, this culture of like thinking about what was it going to take to preserve the future of this institution. The thing that had to happen was I had to every day stand up in the mirror and say, I'm doing the right thing for the institution. Yeah. I'm doing the right thing for this institution and for our students. Or it just would have been intolerable, the amount of pressure that you were having to sustain. And that, I kept saying I would just witness their anger. I would just witness their anger because I understood why they were angry, but I also knew we had no choice. Yeah.
I almost want to go back to this "why did you do this job" question again, but we'll keep moving. Eric, I went to you for the darkest day. So now we reach the end and we go optimism. When did you know it was working?
How did I know it was working?
When did you say, oh, this is actually going to work?
Is it working, Paul? I don't know. I mean, this is one of those things where so I didn't say it, but I was part of the founding of the university, Harrisburg University. So they, in the creation of the university, there was a mayor of the city of Harrisburg. He was mayor for 27 years, and so he could take the long view of things. And he hired 2 or 3 people, and I was a consultant to this project. And so, I felt part of the problem that what we had created. And then, I became president in 2012. I had started as the chief financial officer, and to me, I'm only half joking, Paul. Am I done? I don't know. We'll be 9,000 students in the coming year from 73. And I still feel we have a lot of work before us. And we hire faculty, we hire staff to be 2 things: student-centered and want to build a university. Not want to build their research agenda, not want to build their individual portfolio, not want to see their name in publications, not any of the things that, colleague faculty that I've had through the years care about, but want to build a university. And if you get people that are student-centered, 1, and 2 want to build a university, then a lot of other things can kind of go sideways. But if that's the core of what you're working with, then on any given Wednesday, it's probably going to be okay. And so we don't think about ourselves as being done or being okay. We think about ourselves as we have this tremendous opportunity that's been given to us. We've created world-class science and technology programs that in most of the world do not exist. You've traveled to the Middle East, you travel to India, you travel to Africa, they just do not exist. And so we have this amazing opportunity before us to change the world through education, and we're not done and don't feel like what we've done has been sufficient.
Well, I'll take that as an acceptable way to not answer the question. But I actually think it's a good question, so I'm going to ask it again. Peter, you were a very difficult transformation, a large institution. When did you think it was on the right track? What was the moment where you felt like it was going in the right direction?
So one
Well, that was a different question.
Well-
you said, when did I know it had
You gave me.
you
I
said,
learned from the
when
failure
did I
of my
know it
first
had
question,
worked,
and
you
I
know?
refined it. I'm learning from you guys right now.
agile, figuring out what to do next.
Being on the right track is different than.
We have an acronym.
His turn.
The acronym that we have inside the university, which is something to kind of the shorter part of your question in terms of an answer, we have an acronym called CRY. And it doesn't mean, every day you're sitting there weeping. It stands for continuous relentless improvement. So in terms of is it working or when did you know you were on the right track, to his point, we will never be finished and never be satisfied with where we are. But we knew that we had turned the corner when we had 17 months in a row of increasing student performance, student progression, and students being on track to graduation. And that was a turnaround from what had happened before. So from a student standpoint for us, the only reason they come to the university is to get a degree, to further their career or change their career. And if we're not offering that and delivering that, we're not succeeding at our mission and we have no reason to exist. So for the first 12 months, all we focused on was what do we need to do to improve student progress. And so the measures along that, and there are many things we did that I could go into about how we achieved that, but that 17-month constant line going up gave everybody inside the university some pride in what we were doing for our students. So that was really important as a first step, but you can't have at the end of the day just one student left who graduates and have no university. So the second thing we had to do once we'd stabilized our student progression was to look at how many students we had in the university and whether or not we were increasing enrollments of students who were qualified to graduate. And in September of this year, we had our first month where we had more students enrolling in the university than the prior year. And in October, and in November, and in December, and in January, and in February, and in March. So we finally recognize now that the university is on a healthy track. We are serving our students well. Our students are getting to graduation and getting the benefit of the bargain. We are enrolling new students at a rate that is higher than the previous year. And our staff we measure our staff satisfaction through a third-party survey called a Glynn survey, and we measure their satisfaction. Are they happy being employed here? Are they looking for another job? What do they think of the culture? What do they think of leadership? And so we've tracked that every 6 months as well. And for the 3 times we've done this now, each time our survey scores have gone up, which means, again, we're serving our employees as much better as servant leaders, which allows them to serve our students much better. So I think those 3 things have helped us know that we were on the right track. And one more comment, just quickly. We probably are the most scrutinized university in the country. So the Department of Education, the Higher Learning Commission, our regional accreditors for our business school, our nursing school, and our psychology program give us routine proctology exams in order to make sure that we are standing up for the values that we have. And we have successfully passed all of those bars and gone through all of those hoops with the Department of Ed, with the Higher Learning Commission, with KCREP, with the Council for Psychology, and for the business school. And in each case, they've recommended that we move forward without any sanctions whatsoever. So those are kind of 4 different attributes that let us know that we're on the right track. But
I
still
buy
have
it.
a lot to do.
Sounds pretty good. All right, so this conference isn't just a university conference. It's a lot of investors, a lot of ed tech companies. What can the folks representing those constituents do to help universities in transformation? Nivine, I know partnering with companies has been part of your strategy.
So a lot of times it's about helping us find solutions that will serve students very cost effectively, right? And so, and in our case, we've looked at a number of initiatives where our goal is to really be able to scale the opportunity for students. So it becomes even more critical in those situations that it's a cost-effective solution that helps us to better serve our students, whether it's through better courseware, improvements in adaptive learning or AI, whether it's in finding cool scheduling solutions that create a more efficient way of utilizing our human capital at the institution. Any of those things end up really helping us to be more effective and more efficient as an institution.
We're running out of time. Last question will be for you, Michael. Secretary of Education could be a very important role, particularly if the right president hasn't really, you've been rumored to have political ties. There were some rumors about you running for governor one time. It hasn't really been a Secretary of Education that's been a higher education focused, but with the right president, it could be tremendously powerful. So my question is, when you're president, will you think about me for Secretary of Education?
Absolutely. I look forward to the ability for you to raise money for my campaign.
I would like to let's thank the panel. They were fantastic. I promised the best panel in human history, and I think we came close to delivering.